All right, good morning and welcome to the VIP seat. Today is January 23rd, and today's top stories in private aviation include the flurry of executive orders coming down the pike and how to deal with those in business aviation, plus the Part 380s, seats by the charter, security issues everyone's been talking about the last week and what's going on with that. So your hosts today include yours truly, Jesse Mayor as always, and today we also have Adam Hartley. Adam, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Jesse.
No, we're excited to have you here. You're like the OG BizAv content creator video guy. So I think this is exciting. Can't wait to hear what you have to say. All right, folks, sit back, buckle up, and let's take off. All right, Adam. So we've been hearing about this Part 380, JSX. Is it a charter? Is it an airline thing? I didn't even know how many years at this point. And while the FAA at the moment has seemingly kind of backed off of changing any of the rules, the TSA has been working on different security concerns and other things. And they just came out with a new ruling that essentially, while no one can actually say the details out loud because the TSA has the sensitive security information program, so they can't actually say what's going on. But my understanding from the outside looking in is that these airlines are going to, or the, non-airline Part 380 charters are going to have to go to the same standards that you see in the typical airport, the typical screening process and machinery, all those sorts of things. What are you hearing so far, Adam, out there? I know, again, you can't say, anything from the SSI information, but what do you think?
Well, I mean, just from my take on it and spending 20 years in business aviation, I have never actually used JSX or similar, but thinking about the kind of structure of those operations versus certainly a private Part 91 corporate operator, which is light years away from what JSX is doing, or even a Part 135 charter operator. I think there are a couple of things that are very different about these 380 operators than either one of those scenarios. And the public aspect, the public access aspect of it, the limited vetting, the limited time and limited relationship that these operators have with their passengers, and then the price points. The price points, I think, are something that makes it a bigger risk and something that's more available for people who have bad intentions. And I think so if you stepped back from it and you didn't have a stake in either bucket, and we were just trying to compare operation type to operation type, protocol to protocol, security risk to security risk, that I think it falls much closer to what happens in the 121 scheduled commercial world. I don't know that there's not space for all of these operations, and I get that the Part 380 is trying to sell this semi non-scheduled business aviation environment, but selling that as a marketing tool and facilitating that as a secure business practice that TSA is going to agree with are just two different things. And it seems like maybe that, those ideas and their luck has maybe run out when it comes to trying to portray themselves that way with me not having any kind of interest in it at all. And the type of business I support isn't involved with those kind of guys. Where I see it, if you backed up from it as different types of operators.
Well, the industry has been really split on this. There's folks that are annoyed because the airlines and their group, they have been lobbying against these sorts of operators because they see them as competition. And, the people who are kind of pro 380 say, well, they should be allowed to be a new entrant to the market and they should be able to do different things. There's no safety risk here. There's not been an accident, but they are failing to. I'm on the other side of the fence. I don't agree with that. I think, look, you're getting on an airplane with people you don't know when you're in a private jet or, 91 or 135 operation. These are people that you know. Also, the aircraft are a lot smaller, generally speaking, maybe not a G650, but I think that's a lot lower security risk if you have a Phenom 300 with three people who know each other flying on it versus a regional jet, with who knows who's getting on this aircraft. It's inexpensive to get on this aircraft in the first place. They have 180 days until these new requirements are going to be implemented. I don't think it's going to be a huge thing to overcome. I think if you want to be in that space, you're going to have to invest in the security equipment. I think it's probably a better outcome for them, at least for the moment, than getting totally canceled or not allowed to fly at all. It seems to me like we do need to control the security risk of this. It's much more about that than it is about the safety side.
And I got to think that as they've argued this and tried to state their position with the FAA, that I would think that in the background, They've been thinking about what it's going to take, calculating costs of what it's going to take to incorporate TSA into their business. As I don't think they intend to all shut down if this becomes a thing. Maybe that's what happens, but I think that they've probably had this in their back pocket for a while and knowing what it's going to cost. I'm sure there's been conversation with TSA about what specifically they'd be looking for
Yeah.
to integrate with these guys. And 380 is kind of spelling it out in much more specific detail. And it sounds like airlines.
Right. Yeah. If it looks like an airline, it's probably an airline.
You won't find me, a business aviation regulatory guy, siding with the airlines all that often. But
Yeah.
in this case, it seems more
Yeah.
like them than us.
Well, and look, it's dirty tactics. Obviously they were kind of a small player. The airlines got wind of all these Part 380 happening, and they're like, "Oh no, we're gonna squash this stuff." So, like, I get that argument. The other interesting part of this too is that on Monday, the TSA administrator also was apparently forced to resign with the new Trump officials coming in. So I also have to wonder. I'm sure that he was much more behind the security change. And now that there's going to be someone else in the position, are they going to feel the same way? It's just another little weird wrinkle in the process.
Yeah, we can't, for sure, as we move into this next administration, we can't say, well, this has been decided. And so now we know what the roadmap is, because, it seems like all things are open at the moment is kind of the position that we have to take to be working on this.
Let's take a moment to talk about an exciting step forward in aviation sustainability, AvFuel Zero. This program is redefining sustainable aviation operations. As the only sustainability program offered by an aviation fuel supplier, AvFuel Zero simplifies the net zero journey for operators of all sizes. From assessing emissions to reporting carbon footprint reductions, it gives you unmatched direct access to innovative solutions like sustainable aviation fuel and carbon offsets. I hear it all the time from operators. Sustainability is this big buzzword, but it seems out of reach. Well, AvFuel Zero helps you make sense of sustainable solutions, including what they are and how they work together to help you achieve measurable goals. But it's about more than hitting goals. It's about leading meaningful change. Discover how AvFuel is making a sustainable future accessible at avfuel.com/zero. That's avfuel.com/zero. All right. Well, and that's a really good segue to the next topic, which is all of the executive orders. Trump obviously took office on Monday, and it's just been, piece of information after piece of information coming out. You just did a webinar for Universal. Maybe, start with what are people asking you and what are you telling them at the moment, given that we don't really know everything that's going to happen?
Yeah. And what's important is, when executive orders, presidential actions come out that affect the business, and what we're looking at right now with just the wide range of potential topics that the administration is talking about, international trade, immigration policy, security policies, like we're talking about, there's so much on the table right now. And that's a really challenging way to make regulation, because it's often doesn't have a holistic picture of what's going on. It's often, single issue focused and could affect, supply chain, could affect operations in a lot of different ways that are not anticipated when we're thinking about the purpose that the author has in mind, right? So you can go back to the pandemic and think about the amount of proclamations that came out regarding CDC policies. They were reinforced, and those were issued a lot of times Friday night at 11 p.m., Saturday night at 11 p.m., and everybody had to, kind of digest it and have their questions ready for Monday morning, when the government was back in, to say, okay, and start working with the administrators and departments that are actually in charge of these responsibilities, right? Business aviation in general, we rely on consistency. We rely on codified regulations. We rely on protocols and checklists. This is like who we are. We are a checklist industry in so many ways. And so when these things happen, and there's an individual action that can change those things, it could shake it up in a major way. So what I would encourage people to do is certainly not use news summaries or opinions as fact when it comes to presidential actions. I would encourage people to go to the Federal Register themselves, to go to the official White House government page, to read all of those things for themselves, and then work with your trusted partners, work with people who help you parse fact from fiction to know if you are affected, and if so, what does it truly mean to your operations? And like I said, be ready to advocate, be ready to get into those anticipated spaces where you might be affected by a regulation or by a proclamation, to work with the department that's in charge of that to say, okay, what is our actual process here?
Yeah.
When, with the pandemic in mind, are we going to be showing test results when we arrive to the ramp? These kind of things. When they say a test, remember they said a test is required. We said, okay, a test when? What kind of test? Who do we show it to? How long do we save it? Like, all of those details often have to be worked out by the departments whose responsibility it is to administrate these things. So
Yes.
nothing is decided per se at a White House presidential action, but it certainly gets the ball rolling in a much different way than
Mhm.
codified regulations work, where there's a proposal, there's a consultation period, there's review and feedback and all of those things to make sure that all of the ideas and all the affected parties are captured.
Yeah.
With this, it's a shotgun start, and then we all play catch up a bit.
Yeah.
And an example of that was today. One of those presidential actions flowed through and has come out from Customs and Border Protection, the executive order on securing our borders. It appears to cancel some parole status for specific nationalities. It calls out specific nationalities: Haitians, Cubans, Venezuelans, and Nicaraguans as specific nationalities who could face parole document cancellation or parole process cancellation immediately. But it also doesn't say solely those nationalities. So even the guidance that came out from CBP following that said, we still need to figure out, is it these four nationalities, or is it these four nationalities are supposed to serve as an example of the types of parole documents that are now affected? So again, shotgun start, and now we decide how to deal with it. The other things that come out there, and you're going to see a lot of this too, is there's reminders that carriers have to vet their passengers and make sure they have valid visas and travel documents or face fines and penalties. Okay. If you bring people in right now without before this proclamation, it was a finable and penalizable, offense to bring people in without travel documents. So you're going to see a mix of new information, old information, a lot of sometimes statements that are just political in nature or are meant to be just a statement to the public versus something they want to see codified. It's going to be a challenge for sure.
Well, and it's across all areas. I mean, it's not only, people crossing borders, which obviously we do every day, children crossing borders, all sorts of things that we need to be aware of, but also, the green policies. How is this going to affect SAF? I know that there were pushes to get, SAF subsidies. Maybe that gets pulled back more. There's just so much. And I think it was 78 executive orders were repealed on top of 20 or 25 being put into place. So it's a little chaos right now. And I also would tell operators, even the people who deal with every day, they probably don't understand what's going to happen. Like, you need to give them some space and some time. And I think as long as you have an open approach and you're transparent with your regulators and saying, like, is this okay? Or is this not okay? What should I be doing? That's the best you can do.
Yeah, and you need to know that the people you're interacting with every day who are facilitating these flights, and for CBP, the GA program manager team that helps kind of govern and lead our industry and how to work cohesively with CBP. It's unlikely that the White House is consulting with those boots on the ground
Right.
before some of these things are. So we all have to kind of talk to our, run it up the chain on both sides, right? To get to work towards each other and find what's the way forward in a safe and legal way, right? And that's all we're searching for, is just tell us how to do it safely, tell us how to do it legally is really what we're after. I think you made a good point about the sustainability stuff, wanting to cancel the Green New Deal and things like that. For business aviation, broader effects, CORSIA is, for the ETS scheme, Emission Trading Scheme expansion is supposed to be coming to the United States with the FAA environment team, leading the way. CORSIA is standing up in different countries around the world. The UK has a consultation on it for UK-based operators. Brazil just launched CORSIA for Brazilian-based operators, and we're on the roadmap, right, to move out of our voluntary stage, which we have very few people participating in outside of the airlines in the voluntary stage at the moment. But that was going to be in our fairly near future, 2026, 2027, to start incorporating CORSIA and mandating that U.S. operators, a much bigger group of U.S. operators, are monitoring, tracking, reporting CO2 emissions and doing it through the FAA, not just the EU and the UK. And
Right.
we'll just, as wind of this runs through the administration, we'll see. We'll see if it becomes mandatory in the same calendar. Leaving the Paris Climate Accord doesn't mean we left CORSIA,
Right.
but it is not a good sign. Or maybe it's a great sign, depending on whether or
Big
not
on your perspective.
your perspective about CORSIA. And I won't go down the rabbit trail of whether or not I think
Yeah.
it's a good thing or not, but I will say we have to stay sharp because it could be effective.
Yeah. And also, too, we don't know where the political winds will change in 4 years either. You got to take things as they come. And I think invest where it makes sense, but also don't get too ahead of your skis at the moment because we just don't know what direction we're going to be taking at times. Although I do feel like Europe is going to continue to push. I don't see like there are political changes, I think, happening globally, but I still feel like Europe is very much committed to sustainability.
There's a public will in the EU and the UK in a different way around these issues that we don't match that energy here in the United States. And so that allows things to move forward, regardless of individual member states. You also have a large block of member states and people with the economic authority within that group that are still committed to these types of things. So you're right. I don't think we're going to see their position change in the short term.
Yeah, well, interesting times for sure. But we did get a bit of awesome news this week that I am thrilled about. So, for those who know him, Chris Rochleau, oh gosh, I hope I'm saying his name right. Chris, he has been the COO of NBAA for the last few years. Before that, he was in all sorts of roles within the FAA. He's been a great help to, I think, to our industry, kind of bringing his institutional knowledge of the FAA over to like what's going on in our industry specifically. But now he's been signed in as the Deputy Administrator at the FAA. With any luck, maybe that'll be a longer term post. Who knows? But congrats, Chris. We are very proud of you. But it will be just amazing to have someone in that position that actually understands the nuance of BizAv, because we've had a lot of people in the role that just they're not familiar with our world. They haven't really been in it. They don't understand why there are the variances that they are. But man, I was giddy when I heard that news this week.
I really was too, and I've been fortunate. I had a chance to have dinner with Chris a few times during my stint as in leadership for the Schedulers and Dispatchers Conference, and really a heck of a guy and a extraordinary advocate for business aviation. Well, this kind of like follows up on some momentum that we've had on that front. Getting general aviation in its first official title under the recent FAA reauthorization in 2024. In a place where we are constantly battling. We were talking about the airlines earlier. Now, this is a different view where business aviation, the airlines are generally not on the same side, and we're often outnumbered and outgunned, and sometimes the people who are in charge are still spending a lot of time learning about us, or spend a lot of their focus or time with us being educated versus taking action is kind of what I've seen. If you don't come from business aviation, first thing you got to do is learn non-scheduled, which is nothing like scheduled. And then you can go and start to help figure out how you're going to address our challenges. But I think it's a great sign for us. I think he's a fantastic advocate, and I was really happy to see that. And I think it's going to give us a true seat at the table and be a real benefit for Ed and NBAA and those other associations that need to get the ear of people that.
Yeah. Well, and for him to have just the exposure for a few years of what our challenges are and why they're unique. People like to just, kind of throw the private jet side away, like, oh, it's just those rich people just flying around. But no, I mean, we're doing so much. We're doing humanitarian flights. We're doing, organ transport, all these different things. And to have someone in that seat will be amazing. And I'm excited too, because he's got a really strong safety background. He was chief of staff at the FAA. So not only is he a huge safety advocate who has this broad range of experience, he knows how to manage people. He knows how staffing works at the FAA. We'll see, how this works. I know deputy administrators aren't always, the final pick, but I'm rooting for him. I hope so. We'll see. We'll see how this goes.
In this group of appointments that we've seen, I mean, if we could have had our pick, right? If we could have had our pick as an industry, I think he would have been in the very top of a list that we would have created. So the fact that it's happened is fantastic for us, I think. And we'll see where it goes. And we're here to support him.
Absolutely. All right. Well, speaking of support, I think people might be calling you for support over the next month. We've got presidential TFRs coming around at PBI again. We covered this a couple weeks ago. We weren't really sure what all the details were about it, and how it's going to be different this year. There have been some changes compared to what we were before. You're still required to go through a gateway airport, which was the requirement 4 years ago, I believe. But now they're also adding a new e-secure flight program that the information needs to be sent to the TSA before. This is in addition to the no-fly list general checking, right? And also it's requiring all flights to be on an active IFR or VFR flight plan. I'm actually surprised that wasn't in there before, but apparently it's new.
Well, I think it tracks as far as TSA is concerned with the expansion and additional uses of secure flight. We had the emergency mandate for security program partners. What was that? Early in 2024, spring of 2024, where we had to incorporate secure flight for an additional group of flights that we hadn't done previously as non-scheduled commercial. So it does not surprise me at all that any new mandates that come out from them, I'm sure secure flight, if legal, like if within the regional scope or within the scope and scale of secure flight requirements, they're going to throw that in there. The expanded tracking, e-manifest data, whether traveling domestically within country, internationally from country to country, is just something that for a variety of reasons is going to continue to grow and something you're going to be transmitting e-manifest to any number of parties before you take off, just depending on where you're going and what your goal is.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and I forgot to mention this when we were talking about Part 380 before and the security of risk that exists today, but I think we are entering a time, there's more global conflict than ever. Knock on wood, we haven't had a major terrorist attack in the United States, but it's easy to forget, 20 years ago, 9/11 happened, and I think TSA is definitely more aware and pushing enforcement a little more of these security measures because we're a little more at risk than we used to be. I think we had a kind of a nice time there where we're everything's fine, but I mean there's been attacks in Germany, in Europe, in the Middle East. We need to be a little more aware because there's just more and more crazy out there at the moment, and we have to keep everything secure.
Yeah, and then what you're also seeing, not only with the vetting too, is you're seeing these confirmation or interactive processes, right? So EU LISA that's coming in the EU, where you're transmitting your visa information or transmitting your passenger to validate their visa information, receiving a go or no go message before you ever depart your origin, right? Your point of origin. You're going to see that incorporated into UK GAR as well. And as people move away and countries move away from visa free travel to at the minimum electronic travel authorization that now is going to have these interactive confirmation requirements. There's very little trust left out there by the regulators and what it's looking like to trust the carrier has confirmed everything and that the persons on board are going to arrive with the necessary documents that they need to stay in the place that they've arrived. And so they are doing their best to provide checks and balances to that front. But visa free travel is going away, slowly, maybe not so slowly in some places. And then the validation of the ability to travel pre-flight is increasing.
Why do you think that is? I mean, I do feel like the last couple of years there's just been this big shift from you can just go to now it's like you got to do all these forms and fill things out. Like that just wasn't really the case a couple of years ago, and now it's like every country you go to there's some requirement for that.
Yeah, the tax environment is exploding. The data environment is really exploding, and it's multi-purpose, right? I mean, there's revenue to be claimed on these passengers for passenger taxes and things like that. So knowing. And then there's just the fundamental ways or reasons for knowing who is coming to your country. And I think some of this is also cost saving measures of having less people who are required to facilitate things on the ground for people who didn't show up and do the right thing ahead of time and pushing people into a proactive situation pre-trip, pre-flight, putting more responsibility on the traveler, more responsibility on the operator. But there's so many things driving it: security, revenue concerns, inter-country politics. Are at play there. Yeah, the days of just get in and go.
Take off to Paris is not the same anymore.
Yeah, it's just not the same. And you may be filing a manifest out of the U.S. and then into the region and then also into the country and those types of things. So you may have 2 or 3 overlapping manifests that are going to different places.
Yeah. Well, and someone pointed this out to me after we did a show with AvFuel, and it was talking about SAF, and the new rules coming up in Europe where you can't tanker anymore. And yeah, the refueling. And at first I was like, oh, this, they're framing it as an environmental issue. They're like, oh, you're burning less fuel, the aircraft's lighter. But when you actually kind of scratch under the surface of that, it's like, no, they want you to buy the fuel in their country. They want to collect the taxes on the fuel. They don't want you tankering, cheap fuel from Greece to France, and I'm like, oh, yeah, that's why that is probably working that way. There's an environmental side of it, but I don't think it's as front and center as they would like to say.
Sure. Agreed.
All right. Well, the last story of the day, Super Bowl is coming up. So this is always a crazy time of the year, crazy flights. New Orleans, I do feel like was always a little better than most. There's a lot more airports available in the vicinity, so it's better than some locations. But the typical multi-thousand-dollar parking fees, all those things are in action. There's a slot program as usual to get into them. And you brought up a good point, getting in is one thing, getting out is another.
And that's where we hear, all the complaints. Everybody seems to understand the front end, right? And there's all the shenanigans that go on with slot swapping and getting people into the right ports, the right times, and the right people, and all that stuff. But I think we all kind of understand the game there. And you're right, New Orleans is geographically located to a lot of airports. And it's not Las Vegas, right, where you've got 2 airports and that's it, nearby. There's so many airports, within 30 minutes on a business jet of New Orleans. So getting people in, whether it's a drop and go, getting their slot. I don't know that parking in New Orleans is that huge a deal for people, but we'll see.
Yeah.
It's always about the departure. Like there aren't generally departure slot programs or departure parking programs. And you got to remember that every principal wants to get to their post Super Bowl party. And most of those are probably not occurring in New Orleans. And so we have this rush for everybody kind of arrives in New Orleans in this, organized manner through a slot program. And then when the final whistle blows, now we all want to leave right now. And of course, that is a challenge for local ATC, airport authorities, airport operators, ground handlers, a trip support provider, everybody. It becomes a challenge on how do we all get out of there through that little keyhole, right?
Yeah. No, definitely we'll always have disappointed people along the way. It just is what it is, and where you're going to get parked, how deeply your airplane's packed in there. I mean, there's all sorts of things.
But they're flying a private jet after watching the Super Bowl. I won't shed too many tears for the delays, but yes, we do our best, and that's just the one. The unanticipated thing that we hear every year is, oh my God, we've had a 2-hour delay trying to get out of insert Super Bowl city, and we weren't expecting it. Well, everybody should expect it because it happens every year.
Every year. And just make sure there's plenty of extra snacks and cocktails stocked, keep everybody happy, maybe keep them in the FBO and bring them some nice things. It's part of the deal.
And tell them ahead of time. People can tell them ahead of time.
Yes.
I know you want to leave 5 minutes after. I want you to know it may be 2 hours after. And they may shout at you right then and say, no, not acceptable. But at the least, if you've said it ahead of time and set some sort of expectation, you should have a more comfortable conversation as you wait on the ramp to the departure.
Well, heck, if I'm paying $30,000 to go to the Super Bowl, I better get out of there first. What are you talking about, Adam?
You and everybody else.
So the reservation program starts on that Thursday, February 6th through Monday, February 10th. It will be a 10-mile radius around the game, starting 2 hours before kickoff and lasting an hour after conclusion. That's the no-fly, no-tem, or no, that's when the no-dem is in place. Keep an eye on it. Good luck out there. It's going to be a nightmare as usual, but should be a fun game. We'll see. The Ravens are out, so I'm like, all right, what are we going to do?
Texans are out too, so my interest is waning, but I'm sure I'll watch. We'll see what the halftime show is.
It's a good excuse to have snacks and cocktails with your friends, so that's fine.
That's right.
All right, folks. Well, with that, we're going to wrap up the pod today. We like to keep it short and sweet for your morning commute. Thank you so much for following us. If you can believe it, we're over 20 episodes now. Give us your comments, suggestions, sign up for our email newsletter. We're happy to hear from you. And we'll see you next time on the VIP seat.